I wasn't eavesdropping. I was barefoot in my parents' hallway, half asleep, holding a chipped mug of coffee I'd had since college, when my father said my name like it was a liability. "She absolutely cannot come," he said, voice low but sharp. "Do you understand what kind of people they are?" My mother sighed. "The tired kind." "I know, but she's still your daughter." "That doesn't matter right now," he snapped. "This is about impressions, about standing. She doesn't fit." I froze. The coffee burned my fingers, but I didn't move. They were talking about my sister's engagement weekend, and I was the problem. "I'm Rachel Monroe. I'm 31. I live in Denver. I work in systems optimization." Boring words for what I actually do, which is take failing businesses and quietly stop them from bleeding money. I don't wear designer clothes. I ask uncomfortable questions. I don't laugh on cue. My younger sister, Olivia, is the opposite: polished, soft-spoken, married into money 2 months earlier to a man whose family owned multiple investment properties, private equity stakes, and apparently standards. "They're flying in donors," my dad continued. "People who care about presentation. Rachel will start asking questions about how their money works, or say something blunt, or wear something off." My mom murmured, "She doesn't mean to." "And that's exactly the problem," he cut in. "She never does." My stomach dropped in that familiar way, like when an elevator starts falling before it catches itself. I had felt this my whole life. At birthday parties where relatives joked that I was too intense. At graduations where my achievements were summarized as, "She's good with computers." At dinners where I was told, "Maybe don't talk about work tonight." But this was different. This wasn't about being awkward. This was about being hidden. They were deciding, without me, that I was too embarrassing to be seen next to wealth. I stepped back quietly and went upstairs like I hadn't heard a thing. I sat on the edge of my old bed and stared at the wall where my teenage trophies used to hang: math competitions, robotics awards, things my parents had packed away years ago. Downstairs, they kept talking. "She'll understand," my mother said weakly. I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, they didn't want me to understand. They wanted me invisible. What none of them knew, what made my hands start shaking as I sat there, was that the family they were so desperate to impress had been emailing me weekly for nearly a year. Different name, different role, different world. To them, I wasn't Rachel the embarrassment. I was the person who fixed their broken systems when no one else could. And sooner or later, those two versions of me were going to collide. They just had no idea how hard. I didn't always know I was too much. As a kid, I thought I was just curious. While other children chased each other around the backyard during family cookouts, I sat at the picnic table counting how many burgers came off the grill and wondering why my uncle complained about money but bought a new truck every 2 years. I asked questions adults didn't like because they didn't come with easy answers. Why do we invest in that company if it keeps losing money? Why doesn't Linda work 2 jobs if we're supposedly fine? At first, people laughed. Then they stopped answering. Then they stopped asking me to join conversations at all. "Rachel, no one likes being interrogated." By middle school, I learned silence was safer. But silence didn't mean my brain stopped working. It just meant all the thinking happened quietly, behind my eyes. My sister Olivia never had this problem. By high school, the difference was obvious. Olivia was social. I was brilliant. But that "but" followed me everywhere. She's brilliant, but not very personable. She's brilliant but intimidating. She's brilliant, but you know how she is. The moment that branded me permanently came at Olivia's college acceptance dinner. We were at a fancy Italian place: white tablecloths, cloth napkins, the kind of restaurant my parents only chose for special occasions. I was 17 and nervous. I stood up to let a waiter pass, misjudged the space, and knocked into his tray. Red wine splashed across a woman's cream-colored dress. The restaurant went silent. My mother's face drained of color. My father grabbed my arm under the table, fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "Unbelievable," he hissed. "This is exactly why I worry about you." I spent the rest of the night in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, cheeks burning with shame, promising myself I would never put myself in a situation like that again. And I didn't. I stopped going to parties. I stopped trying to fit. I started disappearing into numbers. Numbers didn't judge tone or posture. Numbers didn't care if I smiled. In high school, I taught myself Excel for fun. In college, while Olivia posted pictures from sorority events, I stayed up until 3 a.m. building forecasting models for small online shops that couldn't afford consultants. Data made sense. People didn't. Back home, none of it impressed my parents. So, you still doing that online thing? My mom asked once. My dad laughed. She'll grow out of it. Get a real job eventually. Meanwhile, Olivia went into marketing, landed an internship through networking, and became exactly who my parents could proudly introduce. And I became the daughter they quietly prepared excuses for. By the time my sister married into money, they weren't asking whether I belonged at those events. They had already decided I didn't. What they never asked, what never crossed their minds, was whether the world they worshipped had already made room for me, without them even noticing. The funny thing about real power is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear designer labels or talk loudly at dinner parties. It sits quietly in the background, watching patterns, waiting for the right moment to move. That's what my life became. By 28, I was making more money on the side than my parents had ever made together in a year. Not flashy money, strategic money, the kind that arrives through wire transfers with vague descriptions and strict NDAs. I upgraded my setup before I upgraded my lifestyle. Better monitors, faster machines, backup servers. I treated my work like a craft, not a flex. And still, every time I went home, I was Rachel who works on her computer. One Sunday afternoon, while helping my mom chop vegetables, she said casually, "You know, Olivia's in-laws asked about you." I looked up. "Yeah?" She told them you're analytical. My mom said carefully. They laughed, said that must be challenging. I waited for her to defend me. She didn't, like it was a flaw. That night, back in my apartment, I logged into a dashboard showing year-over-year performance for a hospitality group I was still consulting for. The changes I'd made were now being presented internally as a shift in strategic vision. But this time, invisibility wasn't weakness, it was camouflage. The family I was consulting for, wealthy, respected, deeply obsessed with appearances, trusted me completely. They followed my recommendations without question because I had earned it quietly, methodically. They didn't know my parents. They didn't know my sister. They didn't know the version of me that had been asked to stay quiet, stay small, stay out of sight. To them, I was the mind behind the numbers. And then, one afternoon, everything clicked into place. I was reviewing a shared calendar invite when I saw a familiar last name. Monroe. My heart skipped. I scrolled. Ray Reid. Checked again. The hospitality group I worked for was hosting a private engagement retreat for one of their investors' children. Location: a luxury resort in Napa. Attendees: board members, family, select partners. The groom's name matched my sister's married name. Same dates, same venue, same family. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I cross-checked one more thing: ownership structures, investment arms, shell entities. There it was. The family my parents had been rehearsing for. The people they were terrified I'd embarrass them in front of. They were the same people who had trusted me with their business survival. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding not with anger, but with clarity. They had built an entire narrative where I was a risk, where my presence was a liability, all while unknowingly standing on a foundation I had helped reinforce. I didn't feel the urge to expose myself. Not yet. I felt something better. Patience. Because the best kind of revenge isn't loud. It's letting people reveal exactly who they are, right before the truth walks into the room. For the rest of that afternoon, my family followed me with their eyes like I was a loose thread they were afraid to pull. At lunch, I was seated at a long table overlooking the vineyards right between two senior partners and across from a woman who ran acquisitions. Name cards placed deliberately. Mine read Rachel Monroe, Strategic Systems Partner. My parents sat 3 tables away, close enough to see, too far to interfere. Every time someone leaned toward me to ask a question, my mother's smile tightened. Every time I spoke and people nodded instead of drifting away, my father's jaw clenched. I didn't dominate the conversation. I didn't need to. When someone asked how we stabilized revenue across properties with wildly different demand patterns, I answered calmly. When another asked about long-term risk, I walked them through it step by step. No jargon, no showing off, just clarity, the kind people listen to. Across the table, Olivia barely touched her food. At one point, our eyes met. Her expression wasn't anger, it was confusion. This wasn't the sister she remembered, the one who knocked over wine glasses and asked the wrong questions at dinner. This version of me wasn't trying to be included. I already was. Later that evening, as guests gathered near the fire pits with glasses of wine, my dad finally cornered me. "What is going on?" he asked under his breath. "Why are people treating you like this?" I studied his face. He wasn't angry. He was scared. "I've been doing this for years," I said quietly. "You just never asked." My mom joined us, eyes darting around. "Rachel, we just didn't want you to feel overwhelmed." I almost laughed. "Mom," I said gently, "you didn't want them to feel uncomfortable." She swallowed hard. Before she could respond, a staff member approached. "Miss Monroe, they're ready for you in the main hall." The main hall. My parents watched as I followed him through tall wooden doors into a softly lit room where a screen glowed at the front. Chairs filled quickly. Conversations hushed. This was it. I stood near the stage, flipping through my notes not because I needed them, but because old habits die hard. My heart was steady. My hands weren't shaking. Through the open doorway, I could see my family standing at the back, not in control, not prepared, just watching. When Daniel Carlisle stepped up to the microphone, he smiled at the room. "Before we celebrate this engagement," he said, "we want to acknowledge the person who made this year possible." He turned toward me, the architect behind our recovery. A spotlight shifted, and in that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before in my family's presence. Not anxiety, not shame, gravity. Because once the truth is spoken out loud in a room full of witnesses, no one gets to rewrite it again. The applause didn't explode. It rolled in slowly, deliberately, like a wave building strength as it moved. I stepped onto the stage, the soft lights warm against my skin. Faces looked up at me, not impatient, not polite, but expectant. People who understood value when they saw it. I began without a script. "When I first saw your numbers," I said, voice steady, "they told a story no one wanted to hear. Not because the company was failing, but because the systems were lying." A few knowing smiles rippled through the room. I walked them through the turning point. How outdated assumptions had cost millions. How small changes tested carefully had reshaped demand. I spoke about risk without fear and growth without fantasy. This was my language. Halfway through, I noticed my parents. My mother stood frozen, hands clasped tightly. My father's face had gone pale, like someone watching a foundation crack beneath their feet. Olivia looked like she was finally connecting dots she hadn't known existed. I didn't look away. At the end, Daniel returned to the stage and said the words that changed everything. "Rachel didn't just advise us," he said. "She rebuilt the spine of this company." The room stood. That's when it hit me. This wasn't revenge in the way movies show it. No shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic speech, just undeniable truth. After the presentation, people crowded around me. Questions, compliments, business, cards pressed into my hand, invitations for follow-ups. My parents waited until the crowd thinned. My dad spoke first. "Why didn't you tell us?" I searched his face for anger or accusation. "I saw regret." "I tried," I said. "You told me to stop talking." My mom's voice trembled. "We didn't know it was this." "This is what happens when you listen," I replied gently. Olivia stepped closer. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear." "I know," I told her. "You were taught not to ask." That night, back in my room, I sat on the balcony overlooking the vineyard, the air cool and quiet. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I felt lighter, because the thing I'd wanted my whole life, their recognition, turned out to be far less important than something else. My own. They could finally see me now. But the truth was, I'd already stopped needing them to. The next morning at the retreat felt different. People greeted me by name. Staff nodded with recognition. Conversations paused when I approached, not out of discomfort, but respect. My family moved through the space more carefully now. At breakfast, my parents sat across from me in silence, stirring their coffee long after it had gone cold. No rehearsed smiles, no instructions on how to behave. Finally, my mother spoke. "We never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. I looked at her hands. They were shaking. "I believe you," I replied. But intent doesn't erase impact. My father cleared his throat. We were trying to protect Olivia's future, her marriage. We didn't want anything to jeopardize it. I nodded. So you sacrificed me instead? He flinched. That's not fair, he said automatically, then stopped. His voice dropped. Actually, maybe it is. That admission cost him more than any apology could. Later, Olivia and I walked the vineyard paths alone. She kicked at the gravel like a teenager again. I always thought you didn't care, she said. That you were happy being separate. I stopped walking. I learned to be, I answered, because no one was saving me a seat. She swallowed. I should have asked. Yes, I said gently. You should have. That afternoon, Daniel pulled me aside. We want to announce your expanded role at tonight's dinner, he said, publicly, if that's okay. I thought about my parents sitting in the audience, about everything they'd tried to control. Yes, I said, that's fine. When the announcement came, it wasn't dramatic, just a statement of fact. My new title, my authority, my future. My parents clapped too late. After dinner, my dad found me near the fire pits. You don't have to forgive us right away, he said, but I hope someday. I studied his face. For the first time, he wasn't standing over me. He was asking. I'm not angry anymore, I said honestly. I'm just done shrinking. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. Revenge isn't always about making someone feel small. Sometimes it's about refusing to be small ever again. And once you stop bending yourself into a version others can tolerate, the world adjusts, whether your family is ready or not. The gala was in full swing when I arrived, and immediately I felt the difference. This wasn't a place where I had to prove I belonged. Every smile, every handshake, every nod of recognition reminded me, here, my presence mattered. I was invited not as a sister or an awkward family member to be hidden, but as Rachel Monroe, strategic systems partner. The badge they handed me glinted under the warm chandelier light. My name official, my role undeniable. The crowd swirled around me, champagne glasses clinking, laughter floating through the room. And then I saw them, my parents, standing near the back, stiff and silent. My mother's clutch was clasped so tight her knuckles were white, her eyes scanning, searching, unsteady. My father's jaw was tight, his carefully rehearsed pride cracked in the gold-lit space. Ethan and Olivia moved ahead, chatting and laughing, confident in the narrative they had constructed, the perfect couple, the perfect engagement, the perfect image. Daniel Carlisle, managing partner of the resort chain, cleared. Their eyes darted toward the podium, suddenly realizing that this moment was not under their control. Daniel gestured toward the wall of innovation. The spotlight hit the centerpiece, and there I was. The room murmured. Gasps spread quietly, rippling from table to table. People whispered, pointed, and looked on in awe. My parents were frozen. My mother's face drained of color. My father's eyes widened, searching for a way to save face. Ethan froze mid-step, realization dawning that the sister he had been told to shield from embarrassment was the very person whose work had kept the empire alive. Daniel's voice cut through the silence. Without Rachel's expertise, much of tonight, the gala, this engagement, even the growth of this company would not have been possible. She ensured our success when no one else could. Applause followed. Not polite, not obligatory. Genuine recognition from people who understood the work, the results, the impact. My parents' faces were pale, their carefully rehearsed authority powerless. For the first time, they could not control the narrative. I stepped forward, calm, collected, letting every word land. I didn't need permission to do this, I said, voice steady. I didn't ask for validation. I built this quietly because I believed in my work. My mother whispered, almost breaking, we didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied, letting it hang in the air. Ethan looked at me, awe and guilt mixing on his face. I had no idea, he said softly. And that's the point, I said, letting the words resonate. I don't need to shrink anymore. I don't need hiding. And I certainly don't need approval to be real. The spotlight on my photo, the murmurs of admiration, the stunned silence of my family, it all felt surreal. For the first time, I wasn't the awkward sister or the disappointing daughter. I was undeniable. And tonight, my presence alone was the most satisfying truth they couldn't ignore. By the time dessert was served, the gala had settled into a rhythm that made every quiet victory I'd built impossible to ignore. Guests were deep in discussions about strategy, innovation, and results, conversations filled with substance, not the superficial chatter my family had always prized. I moved through the room with a calm authority, shaking hands, answering questions, sharing insights. For the first time, I wasn't the sister to be hidden or the daughter to manage. I was Rachel Monroe, the one who made things happen. My parents hovered near the back, stiff and uncertain. My mother's clutch dug into her palm, her eyes flicking repeatedly toward the wall of innovation where my framed photo glowed under soft light. Each glance carried the silent question they had never dared speak aloud. How did we miss this? How could we have doubted her? My father, usually so confident and controlling, seemed stripped of composure, jaw tight, every movement betraying the unease of losing control. Ethan's face was pale. His forced smile faltered as he realized that the sister they had warned might embarrass them had instead become the centerpiece of the night. Then, almost inaudibly, my mother whispered, We didn't know. You didn't ask," I said quietly, letting the words land. Simple, true, and heavier than any argument or lecture could ever be. Ethan stepped forward, voice low. I thought you were just quiet, awkward. I didn't know how much you were doing, how important it all was. I held his gaze evenly. I've been building my life quietly, on my own terms. And now, it's undeniable. Daniel Carlyle appeared beside me, smiling knowingly. Rachel, would you like to share a few words about the projects? I nodded and stepped onto the stage. The room hushed. My parents' expressions shifted between disbelief and shame, while the crowd, board members, clients, executives listened intently. I spoke clearly, explaining strategies, results, and future plans. Every insight landed with weight. Every idea reinforced the impact I had created. The applause that followed was genuine, earned, and unmistakable. My parents avoided my eyes. Ethan's hands fidgeted. He realized the sister they had tried to hide was the reason. The room was buzzing with admiration. Olivia leaned closer and whispered, You weren't behind the scenes. You made this happen. And that was the sweetest part. No confrontation. No drama. Just quiet, undeniable influence. My family had spent years trying to control the story, to keep me in the shadows. Tonight the story had flipped, and I didn't need to say a word. They could see it everywhere I turned. I finally understood the truth. The most satisfying revenge isn't humiliation. It's being indispensable, living your truth, and letting those who doubted you witness your rise powerful, undeniable, unstoppable. The gala ended the way nights like that always do, slowly, reluctantly, with clusters of people lingering as if they didn't want to step out of the glow just yet. I stood near the terrace doors, watching Miami's lights shimmer against the dark water, feeling lighter than I had in years. Not euphoric, not vindictive, just steady, like something inside me had finally locked into place. My parents approached last. No speeches, no excuses dressed up as concern. Just two people who looked smaller than I remembered. My mother spoke first, her voice unsteady. Rachel, we should have believed in you. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest thing to accountability they had ever offered. My father cleared his throat. We were trying to protect Ethan and ourselves. We didn't realize what we were sacrificing. I nodded, because arguing would have been pointless. They hadn't been villains twirling mustaches. They were afraid of standing out, afraid of being judged, afraid of anything they couldn't control. And for years, I had been the easiest thing to control by pushing aside. Ethan joined them, eyes glassy. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I should have said that a long time ago. I believed him, and I also understood something important in that moment. Pride spoken only after public validation is not love, it's convenience. I appreciate you saying that, I replied calmly, but I'm done shrinking. I won't pretend to be less to make anyone else feel comfortable. No yelling, no tears, no dramatic mic drop, just truth. The next morning, I flew home alone. No family brunch, no forced bonding, just space. And in that space, clarity settled in. Over the following months, my life continued to expand. New contracts, new projects, Bigger impact. I stopped explaining myself at family gatherings. I stopped over-justifying my choices. And strangely, that was when they began treating me differently. Not because I demanded it, because I no longer needed it. Distance changed the power dynamic. Boundaries rewrote the rules. And here's the part no one tells you about revenge stories. The real win isn't watching people regret underestimating you. It's realizing their opinions no longer steer your life. If you've ever been labeled the embarrassing one, the difficult one, the one who doesn't fit, hear this clearly. You don't need to prove yourself in rooms that refuse to see you. Build your life elsewhere. Build it quietly. Build it well. And one day, if they finally notice, let them. You'll already be standing tall.